we're on. I'm excited. I haven't done a podcast in 3 weeks. That's another reason why I'm super excited. And you've brought loads of books.
I bring loads of books everywhere, Alex.
Well, it's funny because I did the same, although you brought one more than me. So we both brought Bell Hooks, one of the hardest books I've read, and we both brought James Hollis, Finding Meaning in the Second Half of Life.
Yeah.
What else have we got?
I've bought another of the Bell Hooks books, which is, part of her kind of series on love. So she's, have you read all about love?
This is the only one I've read of hers.
Right, okay. So she's written All About Love, which is like a sort of generic book about love.
Just come to that
and then she's written a book about black people and love.
Okay.
And then she's written The Will to Change, which is about men, and Communion, which is about women.
I'm not ready to read any more yet.
Okay.
I'm not ready to read any more. That was challenging, for sure. In a good way, though. I like being challenged, but that was a lot to take.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't actually finished that one, so I guess, in terms of our gender, it makes sense. But I have read Communion all the way through, and I started reading The Will to Change, and yeah, it did. Yeah, I mean, I could imagine that it's a hard read.
It is. When anything challenges me, though, I do pay attention to it. I'm like, whoa, why is it making me feel like this?
Yeah,
is it because it's true?
Yeah.
So I wanted to be really open-minded as well.
So when you say it was hard, what?
Well, it's about feminism, right?
Yeah,
and it's written by a woman.
Yep.
And she says a lot of things about men.
Yep.
Some of which I was like, yeah, she's bang on the button here. Like there's so much gold in there, for sure. Usually I highlight books, and for some reason I didn't want to highlight this one. I just wanted to read it and really kind of soak it up. But I could have highlighted numerous pages with wow, that's amazing. But then she said things like pretty much like men are emotionally dead these days. And I don't know if you remember the first chapter, she's like, a lot of women want men to die so that they can finally live and not be controlled. And she just said it like straightforward. I've highlighted that bit. Do you remember that bit?
I do remember it, actually. Yeah.
And there's some context to it, obviously. But it's like she's so direct and to the point. I was like, that is a powerful, provocative statement.
I mean, that is a powerful statement. I do wonder whether that's... I do wonder how... I don't know. I mean, I've never really thought of that. That does seem quite... The thing that she says in the women's book, which I definitely kind of resonated, which is sort of related, but not quite, is that she says that... And this... Anyway, I'll say this first and then I'll relate back to it, something that you said to me. She talks about how when women... The first time a woman meets any man, her first thought is this person a danger? Is this person a threat? And that did hit home, because I definitely think that's true. And you said when you told me about your vision quest, I'm not going to talk about the vision quest, but you said that the thing that you were most worried about with the vision quest is not eating for 4 days. Yeah. And my thought, which I didn't say, was the first worry that I would have about a vision quest is that I'd be murdered.
Okay.
So it's kind of, I don't know. So there is something for women, I think, about, and whether that's our socialisation or, what that's about, that fear. But I would definitely say that that's true. Sorry, I've kind of segued from what you were saying.
I get what she's saying, though, because although it sounds like hardcore and ridiculous, if you think, I know many people that have started living their life, for example, when their parents pass, because they're finally free to live their life. You can see examples of it in real life where it's not so insane to say that. She just does have the courage to which is kind of like, you've got your extremes, right? You've got your extreme like Bell Hooks on this side. You've got your extreme Andrew Tate. And whether I agree with any of these people, what I do really respect about a Bell Hooks or an Andrew Tate is the courage to say what they believe to be true. Yeah. Even if we go, whoa, that's shocking. But I think that's a very attractive quality about her. Yeah. And I didn't agree with a lot of it, but I'm like, full respect to her. She's going against the crowd, that's for sure. Yeah. And it gives you, it definitely gives you a lot to think about. It is interesting, because I do think it's interesting to read a book about masculinity written by a woman. So did I.
I think that's quite, I sort of wonder what that's like, because for me, obviously, when I'm reading the book about women, she talks quite a lot about her own experience, and quite a lot of that is quite resonant for me, and I don't feel... Well, I feel like she's speaking from you know, she's speaking from my gender about me, and so, you know, maybe it's easier to read. I don't know.
It was difficult to read a book by a woman about masculinity. What I don't get is, though, I mean, on the back it says, you know, men cannot change if there are no blueprints for change. I didn't think it was a blueprint for change.
Yeah, I didn't really get far enough into it.
No, I mean, I don't know what I'll do differently after reading it. I get what she's saying. I think she's encouraging men to be more in tune with their emotions, which is pretty much standard preaching now anyway. Yeah. I mean, she goes levels deeper than that. But in terms of blueprint, she's kind of convincing men not to be protectors and warriors anymore, and to leave that behind and to be totally equal, right? That's how I interpret it. So it's not our job anymore to protect, which is really difficult for me as a concept to get on board with.
Right.
Because like you say, if your first thought is like, am I going to be safe with this man? I'm like, surely we need good men to protect everyone from not so good men.
Yeah.
And that is found sometimes in the physical, in the protector, in the warrior. So I was just a bit confused. But this is why I love it. I'm like, fuck, it's blown wide open now.
Yeah.
You know,
you're thinking.
Yeah, definitely. It challenged everything.
It's interesting because the other book that's quite... It's kind of making me think about the other book. Sorry,
that's all right.
Making me think about the other book.
Keep reminding you, don't we?
Which is the Terence Real book about relationships, and specifically about relationships in the context of the patriarchy. And in that book, there is actually quite a lot more about what men and women can do to do things differently. So he talks about the first kind of step when there's kind of difficulty in a relationship, between a heterosexual relationship, is that the woman needs to be encouraged to speak. So the woman needs to kind of find her voice, and the man needs to kind of hear that and be able to, and also to access their own vulnerability. So and he talks quite a lot about different relational skills, like how you might think about speaking differently within a relationship that's a heterosexual relationship. I mean, it is interesting because I think for me the point is, what I don't like getting into is talking about it as if, like, you know, men are bad, women are good, or vice versa. Like, I think for me, when I talk about the patriarchy, I'm talking about it from the perspective of men and women, and it being difficult for both. You know, that actually it set us both up. And Terence Real talks quite a lot about basically how it's about domination and subordination. The patriarchy kind of encourages those messages, like, you know, power over. And that, you know, and traditionally that would be men having power over women, or more power over women. And you do see that, like, that is happening in life. But I think what often gets missed is the fact that in that situation, men miss out too. Like, it's not easy to be, you know, if you're a man and you can't express your vulnerability, that's really painful. And I see that quite a lot with young men and boys at work, that they're expressing, you know, that they can't cry. If they cry, they're going to be ridiculed, like, forever, kind of thing. That's how they see it. And so they're cutting parts of themselves off to fit in to a society, which actually, and then that harms everybody, really.
But isn't that our first kind of rule? It's like, we want to fit in, don't we? So we will create the persona and the personality that we need to do to fit in.
Yeah.
I think this is the confusing thing for guys. Like, a lot of us guys will hear the message that women like masculine men, like whether they vocalize that or not. And a lot of the complaints I hear from women about their partners are about non-masculine traits. You know, he's not driven. He doesn't get up. He doesn't get after it. He doesn't move. He's on the computer. Do you know what I mean? So there's this kind of indication that women would like that.
Yeah, but and she does talk about that in the book about women and love, because she talks about how exactly that women say they want vulnerability in men. They want their partners to be to be vulnerable and talk about emotion, but actually when they do, they're kind of like, what? What are you doing?
Yeah, I get that. I remember the last girl I was with, she was like, I love the masculine side of you, Alex. She's like, I love the fact that, you know, you get things done, you look after me, and, you know, yeah. So to break that persona was difficult to show that, well, I'm also really scared and weak and vulnerable.
Yeah.
It kind of like took away from what I thought she really loved.
Yeah.
Which was that strong side.
Yeah.
So to show both is a skill. And if I'll be honest, from what I was picking up, she didn't really want to see that side anyway.
Right,
as much as it was encouraged to be shown.
Yeah. But that's where the conversation is, isn't it? Because actually what you're saying, I think what we're saying is that there's space for everything. I mean, what you don't want is to be constrained by the messages that society gives you. And it's about finding your own balance in your own particular relationship and in your own self about, what you're comfortable with in terms of, protector, vulnerable, all the different parts of you. And it's a massive dance, isn't it? It's like a dance trying to figure it out.
I'm just wondering how much is her going against nature? Is she trying to re-engineer human nature? That was my biggest challenge. Is what she's saying, is it really idealistic and not realistic? That's kind of how I read it. Do I think all men can improve and become more in touch with their emotions? 1000%. I know that to be true. Can we become better listening? Yeah. Can we become? Yeah, I do. It's just how much is too vulnerable and how much is too open and how much is, are we ever going to get a 50-50 split? And not just between men and women, just in any dynamic of relationship. Does it exist? And does someone need to sometimes take the lead? Does someone need to be the stronger person at one particular time? And then does the other person at some point?
But again, that's a dance, isn't it, between
two
people? I mean, I think that's a really interesting point because biology is a factor, isn't it? I mean,
I think she overlooks a little.
Yeah, I would agree.
She doesn't really talk much about it. Yeah,
I would agree. But I definitely think that is part of, that's part of, what makes us who we are, isn't it? Is our biology. And it does change. And there is, I know there's evidence about like women in midlife and estrogen levels dropping, and therefore you're less kind of focused on, you're more likely to be more authentic, less focused on kind of relationship and managing other people because you're kind of less sensitive from a biological perspective. So that's interesting. I don't really know the biology about men and stuff, but it will be there, I'm sure.
There was some data came out today on the podcast that I was listening to that's saying people that are far right are proven to have much higher levels of testosterone.
Oh, really?
Yeah, for sure, because of their kind of character. Yeah. So they're the kind of people that will get up, they will train, they will be organised, they will get things in order, they will be driven, they'll have a business. Very high personal self-responsibility. Yeah. So they're very much on that right-leaning side versus what this podcast was arguing was the left, which is more like, will tell us what to do and we'll do it kind of thing. So there is, even in, I think, in our views and the way that we live life, by our genetic makeup, by the way our brain's wired, I think it affects our beliefs, the way we see the world. How we think, how we feel, therefore what we stand by. So it is, I think that's a great way of putting it, like a dance.
Yeah.
And maybe we can learn how to dance better, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is interesting though, because just going back to what you said about, because it does make me think about young boys, and how I do think like there's a certain point where boys recognise that they have to be more, that they have to kind of cut off a bit from their emotion. Like I think if you look at little boys, they do cry, they do, they're very joyful, they, they do express themselves quite fully emotionally. And then as they grow, actually that kind of gets dampened out of them. And so I definitely think that the way that we socialise, our children, does have a massive impact on how they end up relating to others and how they end up relating to their world and, the environment and everything around them. So it is interesting. I can't remember if I've said this to you before, but I volunteered in Romania years and years ago now. And the kids that I worked with didn't have, they'd basically been in an orphanage, not had any sort of clothing. And I remember when we started handing out, like we used to take clothing in for them and they'd all get changed when we were working with them and into kind of like normal clothes, not like the uniform. And they would both choose whatever, the girls and boys would both choose anything. And I never forget these boys like running around, just wearing these dresses that they'd wanted to pick out. And there was something, I really sort of noticed, these were kids who'd really grown up with, they'd grown up in massive, massive, horrible neglect and, it was awful. But they'd also but they hadn't had any of those messages, so they were just choosing what they liked.
Mm.
And that kind of struck me. I was only 19 or something, but I remember thinking, oh, it's interesting.
Which is great, right? Like the freedom to do that as a young boy without the pressure or the guilt that comes with picking that dress, but you're supposed to wear this blue t-shirt and these jeans. I get that. Yeah. The worst thing is, I think if I had a son, I would, even knowing all this stuff, I would find it hard not to bring him up to be the boy who was quite boyish and manly. And that would be my perspective on that. But to be tough, strong, kind and generous, of course, but I'd want him to be resilient. And I think my way of doing that might be to push him towards probably the things that this book encourages you not to do with young boys. Yeah. And even knowing that might not be helpful, it's kind of still my tendency to probably prepare him rather than protect. Does that make sense?
It does totally make sense. Yeah, it does totally make sense. Although, and I'm sure that's probably true. But I guess what I sort of always reflect on with my children is that actually what you want for your children ultimately, like we all say, we want our children to be happy, don't we? Like that's the phrase, I want my children to be happy. But actually, what do you really want for your children? Like, I mean, I remember saying this to my older daughter. I remember saying to her, all I want for you is for you to be happy. And I started saying happy. I was like, actually, no, that's not what I want for you. What I want for you is for you to be yourself. Like that. And if you think about the Gabor Mate stuff, like he talks about the balance between attachment and authenticity. And that's what we're trying to figure out throughout our lives, really, is, we initially as children will always prioritize attachment because we need attachment. We need our relationships. And in a home that's really supportive, you're allowed to be your full authentic self and you are closely attached to your parents. So I think, I don't know, I mean, it's interesting, I think, I don't know how well I do that with my children. It's really difficult. Like you say, you do kind of go into parenting with quite unconscious processes in you that are kind of pushing them into things that, there's definitely points for me where I find it really difficult not to kind of put pressure on or in certain directions. And I can think in the evening, what am I doing? I don't.
But I love that message because I think to be authentic these days, you have to have resilience, courage, strength. So I think you're teaching all those finer qualities too. Here's an interesting question though. So how old are your daughters?
15 and 12.
Okay. So let's say 5 years and they start getting interested in boys, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry to terrify you. Well, the 15. Well, yeah, maybe. Well, let's just go that end, top end. 20 years old, starts dating a boy. It's kind of like, well, what kind of boy would you like her to date? Would you want the protector boy that makes sure she's? Do you know what I mean? It's like when we start looking at it like that, it's like, I've got a daughter. Actually, I want the guy to step up.
Yeah.
I want him to make sure she's safe. I want him to look after her. Not that she doesn't have independence, of course.
Yeah,
but I don't think you'd want like an anti-protector. Do you know
what
I mean?
I do know what you mean, but I suppose I don't know. I mean, I think one of the risks, one of the things that we've stepped into recently is this very binary way of thinking. It's like, if you're this, you're not that. If you're that, you're not this. And I suppose, I guess everyone can be, you can be a protector, but you can also be vulnerable. Like, you don't have to, do you know what I mean? I do think we've become very binary in the way that we see everything, haven't we? And social media has been a massive influence in that, because in fact there's a book which I've not read, but one of my really good friends has read, which was about sort of the changes to discourse since Twitter. Like, I think that I don't know how old it was, but because of the like button on Twitter, all you can do with a post is like it or not like it. And what that means is, what about the grey? What about the bit in the middle? What about, well, that bit of the sentence I do agree with, that bit I'm not sure about. Like, we've kind of, and I think our capacity to have those kind of grey conversations has got a lot.
Sure, and that's
worse.
A great point. Yeah, which is again why I would only do long form podcasting, because it's like, it's all grey. We can talk about things that are so complex that they aren't, this is right, this is wrong. Yeah. I think that's a lost skill. Like, I love talking to you, by the way. I love talking to you. We always have great chats. What else have you brought? So we've got Healing Trauma by Peter Levine. I've never heard of him.
Yeah. So yeah, I bought this one because, well, I suppose because this is like a new area of interest for me, really.
Okay.
And yeah, so basically, I'm a clinical psychologist,
Yep.
and my sort of specialist areas are attachment and trauma. So I work mainly with adopted children. So I work mainly with developmental trauma. And probably over the last sort of 3 years, I've become, like, I was obviously trained in a particular way. Psychology traditionally is trained in quite a kind of mind-based way, cognitive behavioural therapy and psychotherapy and, lots of talk therapies. But because I work with young people who've experienced trauma, pre-verbal trauma.
Pre-verbal?
Yeah, so many of them have been traumatised before they could talk.
Oh, wow, okay.
So actually that trauma is stored in the body in a different way. Like, it's not in words. Like if I walk out of here today and have a car accident or, get mugged or something, I mean, obviously I'm going to have a body reaction to that, but I'm going to immediately be able to narrate it. So it's going to immediately turn into a story, I'm going to talk about it. If you're a very young child, you don't have that capacity because you don't have the words. So trauma gets stored differently, and there are different ways of working with that. And one of the main ways that I work with and my colleagues work with is around relationships. So we'll work with a young person who's experienced early trauma. They've experienced that in an unsafe relationship. Now they're in a safe relationship, and we'll work on that relationship. So we'll work in the context of the relationship to help them trust again. It's all about kind of supporting them to trust, and to trust other people, trust themselves, feel like they're lovable. But for some children, that's really hard. Their body is kind of really dysregulated and can be very shut down. And so I kind of started sort of trying to explore different ways of working with some of the children that were just, struggling to engage with the relational therapy because they were either too shut down or too dysregulated. And that's when I came across Peter Levine, his therapy, somatic experiencing, is like a body-based therapy. So it's a kind of bottom-up therapy rather than, the top-down therapy is the talk therapy. Bottom-up therapy is the, working with the body first. So basically you're working to regulate the body. And his idea is, that your state creates your story. So your physical state, your biological state, if you are dysregulated, and if you're in fight, say you're in fight mode. So, sorry, I'm going into this.
No, go for it. I'm not. Yeah, very interested. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's basically a sort of theory called. There's a theory around the nervous system and how the nervous system responds to threat and safety. Everyone knows about fight, flight, freeze, for example. So that's all about the nervous system. And with somatic experiencing, you're basically tracking the nervous system, like looking for looking to how the system is responding in a given moment and helping the body to come back into regulation.
Okay.
So it's really kind of an interesting.
Sure.
It's not new. I mean, he wrote his first book, I think, in 1995. So but it's not like kind of particularly in mainstream training yet, but I think it probably will be. I think because we're getting more and more stuff around neuroimaging, and we know a lot more about what happens now. I think that we will begin to incorporate more body-based.
Yeah, well, I'd never heard of it until I think you might have been the first person that introduced me to it, and then since I've heard it several times.
Oh, really? Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So the guy that I'm working with, John from Wild Rights, he's convinced by it now.
Interesting.
For sure. He's he said, I've done a lot of things. He said, this has been the most impactful. Yeah. For sure. What might you experience if you're in like fight mode all the time and without even knowing it? Like what would you feel like because if you're unaware of it, right? Like you might not even know you're in this constant state of fight. What would it look like?
Well, I think fight mode. I mean, so when you're dysregulated, you'll always have kind of like Peter Levine talks about kind of having a charge in your body. So there's like an energy charge in your body. So but his sort of theory comes back from him sort of observing animals in the wild and observing how animals respond to threat situations. I should say that I'm quite new to this therapy, so I don't really want to sound like I know what I don't fully know what I'm talking about here. So somebody else could probably talk about this a lot better than me. But anyway, I'll give it a go.
Sure.
But the fight response. So basically, you would experience energy, a desire to attack. So you might experience, racing heart, increased breath, tunnel vision, muscle constriction. That sort of thing, an urge to attack, to defend yourself. The thing that's fascinating to me, particularly about this sort of approach to therapy, is that it's one of the sort of key precepts or whatever the idea about it is that our responses happen below the level of our perception. So it's called neuroception.
Okay.
And that what our body is always trying to do is to maintain safety for us. So we're always working, our body as an organism is always working to kind of bring us back into a state of regulation and safety. And that, it's like working without us realizing a lot of the time, which I think is...
So how can you get stuck then in a state that's not helpful? So how can you get stuck in like a state of fight? Because you see people constantly like wound up, biting people's heads off. I mean, I've been there for sure. So you can't, like, when it's explained, you go, oh yeah, I've been in this state for a while. That's probably not that helpful. How if the body's always fighting to regulate it, how do you end up being somebody who's stuck?
Well, I guess if you've had sort of early experiences of being under threat, so your body will be your body will be constantly sort of scanning your environment and looking for cues of safety or danger. If you've grown up in a situation where you've experienced a lot of threat, you will be hypervigilant to spotting danger. So you might spot danger where another person wouldn't necessarily spot danger, because lots of things cue danger for you. So that kind of early experience can mean that you're frequently being sort of triggered. It also means that you're just very conscious that danger can happen at any point. Right, so that's why even if there's no danger around you, the danger is kind of within you. Like you're hypervigilant, because to you at any moment there could be a sudden trigger that you do need to respond to. So that's where that idea of hypervigilance comes from. And I guess not just from, I mean, I think, it wouldn't be fair to say that it's only people who've experienced that kind of those early life experiences. I think if you've lived in a war zone, or, there are situations where your body will get incredibly reactive to any sort of form of stress or cues, because you've been overexposed. Like a war zone is a kind of, I guess, a classic, or combat is a classic example of that. The veterans will come back and they are very hypervigilant, very quick to react. And, God, that totally makes sense if you've been, living with that kind of trauma for so long.
There's always new information coming out about trauma, from our ancestral trauma. That's being spoken about a lot now, and it seems like a bit of an open topic where we're still learning.
I haven't quite got my head around that yet, but I get the concept of it and epigenetics, etc. But I guess I don't quite. I mean, there is massively fascinating stuff about that, like the Holocaust research. I think Gabor Mate talks about that actually, but how you can track. I mean, I don't know the research properly, so maybe I shouldn't say it, but I know that there is research around the grandchildren of Holocaust survivors having higher levels of, experiencing more stress symptoms, for example. And the idea of that is that there is a sort of epigenetic process, or whether it's just social, that their parents lived with more stress because of the stress that the grandparents had experienced, and then it bounces down the generations. But
how fascinating is that? So we don't know whether it's at a DNA level, or whether it could be like an environmental level.
I think there is. I don't know this well enough. People will have to look this up. There is, I'm pretty sure there's some evidence of both, but I'm not. Yeah. I don't know that exactly. So.
Well, they say the same in like alcoholism, right? It's like if one of your two parents, there's a chance that, well, in quotes here, you might get the gene. You know, you might be prone to addiction and alcoholism. Yeah. There's a good Stephen Bartlett podcast with Steve-O. You remember the guy from Jackass? He was talking about it. He was like, my dad was a genius. My mum was an alcoholic. Kind of got both traits from them. Do you know what I mean? It was really interesting. But and Gabor was another interesting guy. I really enjoy listening to him. He's very smart. Yeah. Very smart. And he challenges. One thing I love about you and talking to you is that even though you're a kind of an expert in your field, you're very open. I find some experts are so shut and so in their kind of own way that they won't open their mind to potential like new findings and new ways of doing things. But Gabor's like that. He's so open. So he's really the one that challenged, like, do you remember that story, like, if your baby cries, like, just let them cry out so that they become dependent on you? He was the first guy that I really heard say, that's bullshit. That's bullshit. He was on the Joe Rogan podcast talking about that, saying, no, kids need as much love as you can give them. We're on the same
page with that, me and Gabor.
Well, it's weird, because when I had a dog, for example, I would let him cry out a bit, because I'm like, well, I can't go down to him all the time because he'll become... So I get the theory behind it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And maybe a dog and a child is a slightly different thing.
Well, I think there are probably similarities in terms of what they need. Well, we're animals, aren't we? Like,
well, that's why the bell hooks stuff is difficult for me, because I don't think she looks at that.
Right, okay.
She's kind of saying, no, we're not.
Yeah.
We're logical human beings and we can determine how we act and behave. And then I read a Robert Greene book, like who do laws of nature, and goes, no. You can't reverse engineer human nature. It's like, we're all narcissistic, we're all good, we're all evil, we're all bad, we're all loving, we're all hateful.
Yeah, I've not read any of his stuff.
He's a fucking evil genius.
Okay.
Then his book, Power, was banned in prisons in America.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because it teaches you how to look out for signs of people who are trying to get power over you, and how you can sometimes promote power over other people. Okay. So they banned it in prisons.
Oh, right.
It talks about human behavior and how you can manipulate it. But we see it all the time, right? In politics.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You see, I just really hate that whole power over thing. I take your, if we're going to talk about human nature, I get that that's probably an aspect of it, but I do, don't enjoy it really.
On the political front, though, it's essential. Like, if politicians and governments have no control and power over people, then it's a broken system, right? Because but don't you think that we've sort of taken that to the extreme as well in some ways? In what way?
Well, I think we're quite. I mean, I think in some European countries, for example, they have, their political system means that they have kind of, that power is shared between different political persuasions. So you get a kind of more even-handed way of making decisions, etc. Whereas I think and in America as well, again,
America's crazy.
Yeah, America's absolutely completely bonkers.
Very entertaining, but
yeah, but kind of scary.
Sure. I mean, how many parties are there in America? 2, maybe there's a couple more coming through. I don't know well enough, but I mean, I think there must. Here there's 2. Labour or Conservative. Take your pick.
Yeah.
That's why I struggle. I've never voted. And
have you not?
No, I know. That's the normal reaction. I know. But I'm like, do you know what? I'm finally starting to get interested in politics. But I'm like, okay, well, where do I learn what I believe to be accurate information about politics? And I'm even unsure where to start. And then like, okay, well, there's 2 parties, and neither particularly like inspire me. I don't look at any of the leaders in the UK and go, oh, what a great stand-up guy.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? What an inspiring man. Do you know what I mean? I don't look at any politician and feel that or see it.
Yeah.
So I'm like, fucking hell. Oh, I might as well not bother. But it does take away my right to complain about a lot of things that are going on.
Yeah. I do. Yeah, I mean, I have always voted, and I agree that for me, I just think there's things that I'll vote for. Like, I've kind of accepted that I'm not going to agree with everything. Sure. And for me, there are certain bottom line issues that I would always like they're the ones that I take into consideration kind of more than anything else, I suppose.
Yeah, I just feel like if I voted, it'd be because my mum and dad are Labour, and they won't contemplate anything else. So I'm like, well, I would probably just vote Labour, but that's because of the beliefs that I've been handed to. I'd like to form my own.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I don't believe Labour to be the good guys and Conservatives to be the bad guys, and vice versa.
Yeah, and that is not a helpful, you know, taking that position. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we're in such a mess, isn't it? Is because because we're sort of given this message of good and bad all the time, and actually, it's not quite that straightforward.
No, I'm still a big fan of the individual educating themselves on their own behaviours and responsibilities first. I think we could really do a lot of good to the world if individuals stood up.
No, I agree.
Care of their own situation and then their family.
Yeah.
That's number one, surely, right?
Yeah. Well, I think James Hollis is good like that, I think, because he's... You know, because he's Well, I think I just really like that piece about, you know, the first half of life being about... Well, I guess the bit that I like the most about what he talks about is what he writes mainly about, second half of life, and being kind of learning to listen in and to listen into what your, you know, what feels true to you, like what your sense of your purpose is, what your sense of your meaning in your life is. And I think when people do that, like the idea is that, well, the kind of fear around that is that everyone becomes narcissistic and totally selfish and, you know, is only out for themselves, etc. But I sort of think if you really truly follow that part of you, you will be a better person. Like people, I don't think in deep down people want to, you know, just buy loads of crap on, you know, Amazon. And I don't know, I sort of feel like people do have a sense of needing connection and wanting to support and all of that stuff. I mean, maybe that's just naive, but I do believe in the fundamental good of people.
Do you think that's are you experiencing that now yourself, you know, that kind of search for inner purpose? And then do you think people just reach that stage through age and maturity, or do you think that's something that you've worked hard to get to a point where you can start to look more inwards than outwards?
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like I've always looked inwards. I mean, I'm a psychologist, so you know, we're all like that. So I mean, I've always been really interested in people, I suppose, and emotions, and my own. Like, I do think, you know, we, you know, as psychologists, we sort of ostensibly we're looking at other people's stuff, but it's always like this kind of dancing between what relates to me, what relates to my work, etc. So for me, I've definitely always had that interest. I do also think there's a shift at the second, you know, there has been a shift for me at the sort of second half of life. So sort of, you know, for the last sort of 5 to 10 years probably. I'm just beginning to be more conscious about meaning and purpose and having a sense of something bigger. Like I'm not a religious person. I've never been religious. I've never been to church or anything particularly. But I definitely have a sense of something, I don't know what you'd call it, but something greater, something meaningful. And I remember reading a book years ago. I think I was 19. I read a book by a psychologist, and quite a big strand of that was about spirituality and the sort of place of spirituality in modern life and, you know, individual development and stuff. And that does really resonate with me, because for me, what I like about James Hollis is what he talks about in terms of, you know, that we all have a sense of kind of draw or pull towards something that's bigger than ourselves, something that's particularly meaningful for us. And yeah, I definitely, I mean, I think I'm lucky because my job has always felt like that to me and hasn't really stopped feeling like that. I think it sort of changes, you know, like my interests change a little bit, and not massively actually, but probably from the outside it doesn't look massive because I've always been interested in trauma and, you know, young people. But I guess internally for me, I sort of notice the changes of direction or whatever that I want to take. But sorry, I think I'm rambling a bit now.
No, you're not. You're making total sense. Yeah, there's a theory that we all need to connect and plug into something. and it's what we choose to. And it was interesting. The retreat that I went on was the first time that I've kind of got to a level that I started looking at kind of some of the things you're talking about.
Yeah.
And now I'm reading books by like C.S. Lewis on Christianity. I was brought up Catholic.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And then kind of swung really far away from that.
Yeah.
But yeah, at my age, 38, I find life so insane and reality so difficult that I kind of need something a bit more grounded. And I think a faith in something bigger than me and everyone else is the only thing that I can maybe fall back to during difficult times. And look, you kind of, it's weird getting into this second stage of life because you know you're going to die as well. Like, it's a real thing now. It's real.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right. So,
having just turned 50, I can attest to that.
And then I don't know whether you experienced this. I get this inner voice that goes, "You fucked this up. You know, you've kind of missed. You had this opportunity. You haven't lived your best life. You haven't made the most of it." And the saddest thing is, you know, you're going to carry on doing that. That's that voice that comes along. So it's kind of battling with that demon too. But that kind of voice can be helpful because it does make you look at this. Okay, well, if I do have another 40 years, and if my first 38 has felt disappointing or underwhelming, what can I do to maybe improve that? I think some of that is connecting to something more powerful than the narcissistic self.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that is interesting. And and I actually, I mean, you know, because I think a big part of that is sort of nature as well. I think it's just, you know, like the earth, you know, like the fact that all of that is quite miraculous, and that's quite a big.
Have you ever sat there and really thought about it? Like,
yes,
what are we
I
on?
have.
You have, yeah? Isn't it fucking crazy? Like, what? We're on this planet. Spinning around in this crazy cosmos. So what is it?
Yeah, it doesn't. I mean,
it could go on forever. What do you mean it could go on forever? It could have been around forever. What do you mean?
Yeah,
it's fucking insane. It's nuts.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's not really something you can get your head around. But what you can get your head around is that it's, you know, precious and that it offers us all something. Like, I definitely think, you know, there's loads of stuff, isn't there, about nature-based work, nature-based therapies, and your retreat was like that. And, you know, that definitely feels... And I think that's something that we also have lost a connection to. So lots of young people, they're not really that connected with nature anymore. No,
they're connected now more to, like, a social media side of life. That's kind of what we plug into every day, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you know what? The worst thing was kind of coming back off that retreat and then slowly finding myself back in the rat race that I kind of was so grateful to leave behind.
Yeah, and it's really hard to leave it behind because your life is sort of built.
Well, it was beautiful to leave behind, to be honest.
Yeah.
But John, the leader, said you'll find it hard after this to continue to betray yourself. So I'll be open, like, really transparent. The last 2 weeks is probably the worst I've felt in a long time.
Oh,
yeah, really. Like, you know, and people are going, "Are you all right? What's up?" And I'm kind of like, I know it'll pass, so like I'm okay with dealing with these times now. But I think it is that when you experience something and you're like, "Oh, I haven't had my phone for 11 days. I'm with nature. I'm with people. Got good connections. Good."
Yeah.
And then you come back and it's like, then you catch yourself just kind of laptop, phone, bed, wake up, do the same again. You're like, "Oh, fucking hell."
Yeah. And how do you build a life where you make time for that, for those spaces? Because I think that is really important.
But in theory, it's quite simple. I don't know why it's so difficult to do. Like, in theory, you know, take a day off, go and get out in nature and go and climb some mountains. I'm like, I know it all. It's like, why don't we do that stuff? Like, we all know what's good for us, right?
Yeah, completely. But I think that in a way, that's one of the dangers of all the tech that we've got now, is that it is actually, I mean, it is addictive. Like, there, you know, we are addicted to it, and I think, you know, most of us at some level, and that, I find that quite worrying, really, particularly for young people, because I think, and I don't want to knock it again. It's not, for me, it's not one of these binary things. I don't think it's all terrible. I don't, you know, there's obviously lots of good stuff about it, but I just, again, it's like a balance tipping thing. Like, we've ended up being really dependent on it, and for young people, because of the way their brains are developing, for them, it's just like a drug, isn't it? Like, they can't get enough of it.
Yeah, for adults too, I think.
Yeah, I think for adults.
Sometimes I speak about young people, and I'm like, "Alex, hold on."
You
know what I mean?
Fair point.
You know, different. I went for coffee with this lady the other day, and she's a fair bit older than me. She's like, "I can't get off my phone."
Yeah.
I'm checking it all the time. But it's interesting. I read a book called Indistractable, and it says that our battle shouldn't be with like the social media apps, although they are a problem. It's like, what are you distracting yourself from?
Yes. Yeah.
That
Good point.
as soon as I heard that question, I was like, whoa. And
Yeah,
I kind of
good
sat
point.
there and worked out. I was like, when I'm bored, when I'm frustrated, when my life isn't exciting, when I'm lonely, that's when I'll reach out for these distractions. So it kind of, it does mask something, and it's well worth, rather than going to the symptom, to the cause of it.
Absolutely. Yeah,
I guess in like quite a lot of therapies and illnesses too.
Yeah.
It's like we can mask it, we can go to the symptom, or we can have a look at what's causing you this, which I guess is kind of what you do with the trauma side, right?
Yeah, but then you've got to learn how to manage those emotions, because I think that's the
well, that's a skill.
That's the key, isn't
that's
it?
a frigging skill in itself, managing emotions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what Bowell talks a lot about, managing emotions. And I think her argument would be that women are better at handling their emotions than men. That's pretty hard to argue that that's not true.
Yeah.
However, I think as a species, we can all get better at handling our emotions as people, not just as men and women.
I completely agree with that.
But traditionally, I'd say men find it a little bit more difficult to connect with emotion and then deal with it.
Yeah, and I do think, you know, there's I think, again, I don't want to sort of like, I think men are social, you know, boys are socialised to kind of cut off from their emotion, and that they to carry that forward. So, and then it's just stuck in, isn't it? It's stuck inside them.
Yeah.
And really difficult to manage.
What I do know is, though, it's difficult to be around emotional people all the time.
Yeah.
Al Dovey spoke about this. He was like, when I was crying and at my worst, people would look at me differently. And these were people that loved him.
And loved him.
Yeah, and I get that. There was a guy on the retreat. He was a lovely guy. I loved him. But he was blubbering and crying all the time, right? Which is like what we would encourage, you know. He was in so much pain, so he kind of needed to do it. And it was celebrated there as a victory. And I was so glad he did, and I loved him and supported him through it. But part of me inside was going, mate, get a fucking grip. Get a grip. Part of me.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I could hear this voice.
Yeah.
And I was like, that is a natural thing for me to look at this guy who I really like and respect, and just want to shake him and go, mate, get a fucking grip.
Yeah, but I mean,
crazy?
It's crazy, but it's not at all crazy. Because I mean, there's another model of therapy which I also really like, another newish one called internal family systems.
I've heard about this as well.
Have you yeah. I think you mentioned.
My mate did this.
Yeah,
I think it came through a Reiki exercise. Is that right? Where you visualize. Explain it, and I'll tell you. It might be different.
Yeah, I think it might be different, but well, it might be the same. I don't know how it got to it, but you know, so basically, internal family systems talks about how it's called like the theory of parts. So basically, the idea is that we all have different parts of our sort of psyche that have different responses to different situations, and that this is a very simplified version, but basically we've got a kind of self, like sort of like a wise part of ourselves that kind of, you know, is regulated and is, you know, knows what we want and manages things well, basically. And then we've got protector parts, and we've got, I can't remember what the phrase is that he uses, but kind of like the really vulnerable parts, the parts that we want to hide. So those parts of the sort of most vulnerable parts are like our vulnerability, our shame, maybe our rage, you know, like the bits that we can't allow out. And then the protector parts kind of step in to kind of try and block us from showing those bits. And the idea in the sort of idea of internal family systems is that often we're run by our parts. So the voice in you that's saying get a grip, you know, that's potentially one of your protector parts that's responding to that level of vulnerability, and you're feeling like, you know, just get away from me. I don't want to, you know, this is too much for me. But there's another part of you that's saying, yeah, you know, go for it. I really respect, you know, I respect this. And actually it's all right to have those, you know, those two parts alongside each other, isn't it? Like there's nothing wrong with hearing, if you're very self-aware, right? So you're hearing both of those parts. That's brilliant. You're not like stepping into, you know, get a grip, mate. What's wrong with you? And we all have that. Like, you know,
I think the trouble is when you don't know which voice to tune into. So
yeah.
There's some, like Jeff and some books that I've read would argue it is our responsibility and job to become whole, so that we're not split like that anymore. And then there's some books that would say this is totally normal. It's human nature to have the critical voice, the loving voice, the hateful, the loving, and all that. So it's kind of knowing should you just become someone who's specialised that, oh, there's that voice again. I don't need to listen to that voice that's telling me that this guy needs to get a grip. Or should you be someone that works on becoming so whole that you get down to your true identity, which is the loving individual that is acceptant of all? That's the hard thing, isn't
that's
it?
the hard thing. I suppose I just think about it in terms of integration. Like,
sure.
I don't know. Personally, for me, I can't imagine not having, like, I think it would be, there's enough personal work to do in the world without, I kind of can't imagine getting to the point where I've eradicated those voice, I just don't have them anymore.
Yeah.
I guess the best I can hope for is that I notice them. I don't necessarily kind of identify with them too much.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're not who I am. They don't become who I am in that moment. But it feels human. I don't know. I suppose it just feels human to have those feelings about somebody, and feel, it's really complex, isn't it? The way we feel about other people. I hear
definitely.
that.
Yeah. You've nailed it there. I think that's true. But I think you would almost have to identify who you want to be in control of making the decisions.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? So
yeah, completely. Yeah.
So you need somebody on the front door that says, okay, here's that voice. I'm not going to let it in, and I'm not going to identify with it, as you said. I think that's a great way.
And that's what internal family system says about the self. So,
right.
So internal family systems would say that for a lot of people, they're being driven by what's at the front door is the protector parts mainly.
Got you.
But actually what you want is that you want yourself to be at the front door and, aware of the other bits of you, but kind of able to communicate them.
Do you know what? We were speaking off air about this, about the desire to kind of wish that we didn't dive so deep into this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Just be one of those carefree people that goes,
never mind.
Get all that analysed. Just live your life. Just enjoy. But I think you said it brilliantly when you were like, but would that be you kind of thing? Like, were we always going to dive into this stuff? Or is it troublesome? Is it through our own struggles and battles that we just can't work stuff out? Like, I don't know why you would ever want to dive deep into a book that challenges you so much.
Yeah, I just can't imagine not doing it. And I just think it's so. It's just so. People are so interesting to me. That's sort of. I guess that's why, I do what I do.
Yeah, for sure. How did you get into clinical psychology? Like I say, there must be something that drove you towards wanting to sit in front of people and understand them and help them. Yeah, I think probably a combination of things. I think I grew up in the 70s, and that was not. I think child rearing has really changed over the last sort of few decades. So I think as a child I was really conscious of not really being able to speak emotion very clearly. Like, it wasn't really that encouraged in my family, but also I think when I was growing up, children were not really encouraged to speak about stuff particularly. Was that by both parents? Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. My parents were lovely and are lovely, but there wasn't a lot of talk about emotion, and I missed that, and I kind of was aware that was not something that I was aware that was something that I missed. So, and I was always I loved working with kids, so I was always, I always, volunteered with kids, and then, all my jobs really mainly have been working with kids. And so there was sort of like a natural progression. I studied psychology as an undergraduate. I didn't actually know I wanted to be a clinical psychologist when I did psychology. But after my sort of after a few years of working in schools and working in a child psychiatric unit and stuff like that, that sort of just became like the natural path. And I have to say, I've never regretted it. It's just a massive privilege, is the way that I see it. It's a massive privilege. And I get, it is just, I get to be very, very curious about people's lives and their emotional experience and learn a lot. And I really enjoy it. But do you think you've got any key lessons or learnings over the years that you've been in the field? Has there been a common theme that keeps showing itself? For example, would you say like the 0 to 4 years are the things that determine your life? Would you say relationships are like a key to overall fulfillment? Like, is there anything that's like after all those years and hours and hours and hours of practice that you can go, yeah, I know this.
Well, both of those are true.
That's kind of why I use them.
Yeah,
for
I know
examples.
you just given the answers.
Okay, but is it that? And if so, then why would we not just pursue those things?
What do you mean, just pursue what things?
Okay,
Sorry.
so if we're saying, right, because there's a lot of data out there that huge study says good relationships will not only add years to your life, but they will make it worth living.
Yeah.
And then what do we do with that information? We go and pursue like a career.
Yeah, good point.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
like,
yeah.
Why the fuck don't we take those lessons from the people that are like on their deathbeds and the people that have done these studies and like, okay, relationships are number one. I'm going to make myself the person who's good at building connections with people.
I don't know. I think society is not really, like, I think our society is increasingly being set up more and more to not encourage that. And I mean, that's why Gabor Mate is so, I mean, the book, The Myth of Normal, I just think is brilliant at that. You know, it is a big book, but it's so, I mean, he's making that point about how.
Can I have a look?
Yeah. You know, about how the way that we've set up our society, you know, with a pursuit of, you know, our society is very much driven by money producing, you know, it's a sort of capitalistic, you know, way of doing things. And actually that creates a set of circumstances where we get more disconnected from relationships. Uh-huh. I mean, he talks about, I mean, there's one chapter in the book that I really like, which is he talks about the sort of characteristics that our current modern society sort of encourages in individuals. And they are separation from self, so kind of a disconnect from what we truly want or believe. Talks about consumption, that's the first one, separation from self. Then consumption hunger, again. Yeah, so we always think we want more stuff, that we not even that we want it, that we need more stuff, that we need to have that extra thing. And then the third one is, which I really like, is hypnotic passivity.
Tell me about that.
Well, that's basically just you notice stuff going on around you that you don't agree with, that you don't feel is right, and you just kind of let it happen.
Okay,
You're just
that is true.
Passive in the face of.
Right. So how much of this comes down to the virtue of courage? Because I bang on about this. So there was, again, great podcast yesterday saying that one of the reasons, and it was talking about America, is such a broken country is because people aren't stepping up and saying what they believe because of fears of being cancelled, of being sacked.
Yeah.
But they're saying that's exactly where we need courage now to be the winning trait. So that, what was the term? Hypnotic
passivity.
Yeah, to break out of that.
Yeah.
Is it a courage issue or is it an awareness issue? Like, do we know that these things are going on, or do we not know that these things are happening? Because it sounds like that is like, yeah, we can see it, we can feel it, we can hear it, but we're not going to do anything about it.
Yeah, I think some of what goes on, we can choose not to notice. Like we experience like cognitive dissonance, you know, we sort of notice it, but it's not quite affecting us enough, or we choose to ignore the bits that don't match with the way that we want to see things. I mean, you know, that is a really interesting question. I mean, I think about it particularly because I've got a couple of areas of interest, I suppose. I mean, I think there are things that have happened politically, which I really struggle with, like the underfunding of the health system, mental health services, for example. There's not a lot of noise about that, really. There's noise in certain quarters, but not a massive amount of noise. Same with education. You know, one of my sort of big things is I'm really concerned about the climate, and that's like I've been quite active in that, not so much recently, but in the past I have been. That's another massive area where we're just kind of allowing that to happen, you know, not really sort of demanding that things change. So I sort of, I don't know what it is that we've got into this place, but we are kind of numbing ourselves with like social media and food and, you know, whatever stuff we've got, and it's stopping us from really fully engaging and sort of standing up really for what we believe in and what is important to us. I've kind of gone full from your point about if relationships are the key thing, why are we not focusing more on them? And I totally think we should be. Like in schools, why are schools not teaching good relational skills? Like, you know, that seems really an important thing to think about with kids.
Yeah, they're two huge topics right there. I think on the education for young people, I can sit here and 1000% say my life would have been better if I was educated on. I didn't even know what an emotion was until I was maybe 20.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Isn't that frightening?
Yeah.
Never. And it was never spoken about in school.
No. I remember that too.
Yeah.
Wasn't.
It's insane.
Yeah.
And the saddest thing is, I know my life would be much better if I'd have swapped all of the mathematics, history, geography. Not that it's not important, but if I could go back and exchange it for an emotional intelligence training, I would have.
Yeah.
Like, because without that, you can't have relationships. Without some form of emotion, you just can't. You can't function in a relationship if you can't handle emotion. You can't be in a relationship. That's fucking fact.
Yeah. No,
so
I agree.
At 38, you're still trying to get a grip of your emotions and deal with shit that you should have dealt with when you were 20. Yeah. That'd be my thing to young people now. If I was going to teach them anything, I'd be like, get a handle of yourself. You can learn all the stuff as you go through life. You can become smarter. You can read books. Get a fucking grip of yourself and your emotions and how you behave.
The difficulty with emotion is that you can't really teach it, which I think is one of the, that is one of the challenges when you think about schools. I think you can teach relationship skills. You can teach, you can help. You could do stuff around helping people to reflect on relationships, reflect on emotion, etc. But I think it is really, you can't tell somebody not to feel X, Y, or Z. I think you can teach skills, but it's really interesting because I think some schools are becoming a lot more sort of progressive around this, particularly some primary schools. I worked into a school recently and they were talking about how they've changed their what used to be a behaviour policy into a regulation policy, and that is brilliant. Like that, the idea that all behaviour is communication. So if children are, and it's about dysregulation, if children are acting out in school, that's because they're dysregulated, for whatever reason. There might be something that's going on in the school, it might be something they're dealing with at home, it might be something intrinsic to them, you don't know, but actually, it needs kind of looking at holistically and supporting, not kind of shutting it down, behave yourself, follow these rules, whatever. I mean, I get that there's a balance, in education. Again, I don't want to be binary about it. Like, I get that education is, the sort of primary purpose of being in school is to be educated, but there are many important lessons, aren't there?
Yeah, and that's quite an open word, educated, isn't it? Because educated on what? And by the way, when I talk about emotions, I wasn't referring to the fact that you should be taught that you shouldn't feel this. An awareness to what you're feeling, what it is, and how you can deal with that emotion. Because a lot of men will act upon the emotion that they feel. This is where we've got to be careful about telling guys to be more emotional. Well, that's fine unless you're angry, jealous, pissed off, and full of rage. Like, you don't want to be displaying your emotions then, otherwise you're just somebody that lashes out all the time.
So
it's more of a stoic philosophy of this is what I'm feeling. It's an impulse. I understand what it is and why I'm feeling it, and it will pass. Versus boom. It's very different, isn't it? So it's kind of a bit of a paradoxical thing. Yes, men more emotional, but no, you don't want to be more emotional. And I suppose the thing for me is that a lot of our learning about emotion is done in relationship, like particularly in the kind of child carer relationship. So a lot of the work that I do with parents, if I'm working with parents on children who've experienced a lot of trauma, it's more about being with them than it is about doing anything specific. Because actually what a parent does for their baby or infant, when a baby or infant is dysregulated, which obviously they are a lot, the main thing that their parent does for them is be regulated. It's just, there's a kind of biological process going on where the child is very dysregulated and upset. The parent hopefully is calm, and the baby, begins to calm. There's stuff about the synchronicity of heartbeats. If a baby who's dysregulated is picked up by their parent, they will synchronize their heart rate, and that can calm them down. And that's a lot of what I talk about with parents who've adopted children with a developmental trauma, is about actually, being with their child, being calm and being accepting, being empathic, and allowing that regulation process to take place. It's happening late because obviously it's a process that
ideally would have happened as an infant, but might be happening when they're 3 or 5 or, whatever. But so I suppose my point being that's why, that's one of the reasons why sort of teaching about emotion and regulation is quite difficult, because what you're asking an adult to do, if they've not had that early experience or they've not had enough of it or whatever, is you're asking them to to learn how to self-regulate and self-soothe. And it depends what kind of experience they've had of co-regulation as to how easy or difficult they might find that to be. So yeah, it's complicated.
And we're asking a different set of skills from teachers then, aren't we?
Oh yeah, I think for teachers it's really, really hard. I mean, I definitely don't want to kind of, I think teachers get they've not had an easy time of it for a long time.
I would not want to be a teacher.
No,
two things. I wouldn't want to be a policeman now or a policewoman, and then a teacher.
No.
Going back to the heart regulation thing, just quickly, because that sounded fascinating. Are we talking about when the baby's in the womb or outside?
Well, I was talking about outside, but there is also there's a lot of research about babies in the womb and the experience of the mother in terms of stress and cortisol levels and
that makes
all
sense.
of those things.
Being outside though, like when it's like a separate identity, being.
Yeah.
There's still data that like if mum's heart rate starts to pick up, the babies can. Wow, isn't that fascinating?
Yeah. There's a system called mirror neurons, so your neurons are kind of mirroring each other. And that happens.
That's how we learn, right?
Yeah. But that happens in all relationships. So that's happening now between us in our conversation. It'll happen, when you go out into the world, that you're having that kind of, just a kind of unconscious level, making, having an experience of being with another person. So it's just, it is so fascinating. I just think it's, it's amazing. It is. And this is why it's, one thing I've accepted is that I'm never going to learn even everything.
Well, not, I know. What's that theory? They reckon even if you live till a million years of age, you still know nothing. Yeah, and things evolve and things change too.
I keep trying to give myself like a book embargo and think, right, I really do now have enough, and I just can't help myself.
Well, going back to Gabor's, what was his second one? Consumption, something.
Oh yeah, consumption hunger. Yeah.
Is that the same?
That's my thing.
That's my thing too. Like I've got a frigging library at home now, and I'm like, I did a 12-month ban a while ago of no more new clothes, no more new books, and it worked well, but then I went mental when it was over. I was like, right, I've got all these books that I want to buy. But I did think about doing that. Shall I just, for the next year, just pick like maybe 4 books? Which is, can you imagine how difficult that would be to pick the 4 books?
Well, you say that. It's really interesting though, because I think I do now have my, for the moment, I think I've got like a few books that I'm particularly sort of focused on. Okay. And because I'm doing the somatic experiencing training, I've got to read a lot of books about that. So I'm going to have to buy some new books for that.
So do you know then off the top of your head roughly what those 4 books would be? If I said, right, you've got to put a book ban on for the next 3 years and you can only have 4 books, is there any books that you go, well, yeah, this would definitely be in there?
I definitely keep James Hollis.
Which one?
I do really like Finding Meaning in the second half of life.
It's wicked.
I do really, really like
and
that.
And you've got to, although I shouldn't be giving you more books to read now, Under Saturn's Shadow is fantastic too.
Yeah, I haven't read that.
That's awesome. It's only a small book as well, but it's great. Yeah, he's phenomenal. I love that guy. I love the Jungian type.
Me too.
Okay, so he'd be in there. Anything else?
He'd be in there. I would probably. I do really like Gabor Mate as well. I probably would keep The Myth of Normal. I would have In an Unspoken Voice by Peter Levine, which is his sort of. It's kind of the more up to date. His original book was called Waking the Tiger, which was all about the kind of beginnings of somatic experiencing, and then In an Unspoken Voice is the updated version, if you like, with kind of the newer research and stuff, but that's really, really good. I would probably have Women Who Run with the Wolves, which is a kind of classic women's text.
I need to write that down. What's that about?
So that's written by a psychoanalyst.
I was going to say written by a psycho then. So, okay.
It's a really classic book, and it's actually it's kind of based around fairy tales and myths, like old myths. So it's about kind of the what those kind of age old tales tell us about life and about it's in this particular book like about being a woman particularly. So she basically chooses a fairy tale or an old ancient myth from some kind of old, some society, and kind of picks through it with the messages and the kind of what's beneath the surface, the story beneath the story. So that's really good. And I've read it. A really good friend of mine, actually sort of a mentor really, gave it to me when I was 19, I think. And I've pretty much read it every 10 years. And every 10 years, it tells me something different.
Yeah, so, I think timing with books is really, really important. Isn't it amazing when you read a book 3 times and it's a different book?
Oh, yeah, completely. Yeah, that is one of those books, definitely.
Okay. I might have to do you think that's something I'd be interested in? Women who run with wolves.
It's very, very much about women's experience. So up to you.
That was the first book. Like I say, the Bell Hooks one was the first time I've read about masculinity from a woman. So
yeah,
and I learned a lot.
Yeah, it's not a very direct book, if you like, because it's all through story.
Yeah,
or a lot of it's through story.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is a really wonderful book about sort of life stages, and yeah, there's some lovely stories in there. Like the seal. There's one about. Have you know about sealskin, soulskin, which is like an old. I think it's an Inuit story about a group of seals who come to the surface. They basically come onto the shore on a full moon, and they take off their sealskins and they become women. And they sort of dance on the beach, and then they put the skins back on and go back in their seals again. And it's a story. This is it's quite intense.
Sound a bit mental.
Yeah, it's a bit. Yeah, but basically, one of the seals has their skins stolen by a fisherman who's kind of looking for a wife, and so she ends up marrying him, and she agrees that she'll stay with him for 7 years. But then he hides the skin; she can't get it back. But basically, the idea is that the skin represents your soul, and that that your soul can kind of be taken, or kind of be sort of can dry out, you can kind of lose track of your own soul in life, and then what you need is to re-find it. So it's stories about kind of they're quite deep stories about finding spirituality, finding soul, finding there's I think there's one in there about Little Red Riding Hood, the Red Shoe. There's all sorts of different. Yeah. But they all have a different theme, and she's kind of then talking about the theme. So
yeah, well, all those fairy tales wrap up some form of story, don't they?
Yeah, and they're ancient tales.
Like they've
carried us through.
Yeah. I mean, I've just read Joseph Campbell. That was quite a heavy book, but he's the same. He takes mythology, wraps it up into a story. And the Wild Rights thing, they were the first people that kind of introduced me to they would always talk about stories and tell stories.
Yeah.
And the lessons were in the story versus just the lesson. Kind of wrapped up and parceled in this story. And I just read a book called the Warrior in the Rusty Armor or something like that. Same kind of thing, right? It's a little fairy tale. Yeah. It's quite good fun, actually. I never thought I'd be into that. It was a refreshing way to learn. I mean, it was good.
Yeah, well, that's how we teach children a lot of the time, isn't it? I mean, fairy tales are obviously for children, but there was some really interesting research, which I'm going to get completely wrong, but about fairy tales and children who have been read fairy tales, because fairy tales generally have some kind of resolution, even if it's a kind of a slightly macabre resolution. Mm-hmm. So there was some research about how children who've been read fairy tales or had an awareness of fairy tales had more resilience, or that's not quite right, but there was an impact basically on them from having been exposed to fairy tales. I mean, reading's really important, isn't it? Because it gives you a different.
But a lot of fairy tales kind of they would cement the patriarchy, right? Like if you have a look at a lot of someone comes along and saves someone. A lot of the fairy tales are based on these stories, like your Cinderella and stuff like that, right? Absolutely, and all that. They kind of confirm what we're saying now is what we want to move away from. So that's interesting too. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if they're banned soon, some of the fairy tales. In fact, I think some of it's already started to happen. Some stories, for sure.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? The way society sort of moves forward and kind of. Okay. My thing is just it's the extremes that I just think it's really important to avoid the extremes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I always say the answer's somewhere usually in the middle.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's next for you then? So obviously, like, I don't know if you've said your age on this podcast. Like, it was,
I think I did. Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah.
Oh, we can say it now. So it's a pretty, it's a landmark, right? 50. Like I said to you, I'm going to be 40 next year. It's like these big numbers, 40, 50. Whether they mean too much, I don't know. But like, yeah, what is next for you? Like, where are you hoping your career is going to take you? Your interests, like, what are you going to be looking for in the next 5-10 years?
So I'm going to be looking to do my somatic experiencing training.
Awesome. Do you need any clients? Do you need any people? Do you need any guinea pigs?
Quite possibly.
Do you need any people with issues and stuff? I know one or two.
So I'm gonna finish that, and yeah, I mean, I'm really lucky. I really love my work. So I do love working with adopted children and their families. I do want to I'm really interested in, I've spoken to you about this before when we met before, but I really do want to work with young women as well. I'm that is an area that I definitely feel quite called, towards. Sure. I just haven't quite sort of had the time or the kind of figuring out quite how I want to make that sort of happen.
Yeah.
We've talked before about doing group work, and I do think that's something that I am interested in developing. Yeah. So I think, I suspect that attachment and trauma will always, and that work with young children and families will always be a sort of, what's the word? That feels like a really meaningful and fascinating kind of, I love that part of my work, but I do definitely want to develop these other things that I've kind of become interested in. So
was that because of something you experienced with attachment and trauma? Is that why you got into that field?
I think not. I think all of us experience some form of sort of, I haven't experienced anything really kind of sort of dramatic, I suppose, but I suppose a couple of things for me were that my parents were very supportive of a couple of young people who had quite significant attachment and trauma experiences. So I was sort of a witness to that. And I think that being a witness had quite a big impact on my childhood. So I think that is a big piece of it for me in terms of my interest. Yeah, I think that's probably the main thing. And I also just think I've always sort of been interested in the people that have struggled a bit more and, so yeah, that's always been an interest for me. And did I finish that? I feel like I did.
Well, if it's worth anything, I think it would be a great idea, because I think the stage you're at with all the knowledge you've got and you've lived a life, right? Like, that's the good thing about being like 40 or 50. You've kind of lived through some stuff. Like, you
just don't feel like you have though, Alex. That's the problem.
No, but when you're 20 and you're surround yourself with 15, 20-year-olds, you'll kind of know that you have. Do you know what I mean? So I think women, young women would be lucky to learn from you and be around you, I think. And you were the first person that introduced me. How embarrassing is this? I didn't know women's circles existed. I thought it was just what men do, but it's like you told me about women's circles, so that was intriguing. And I'll ask you now. I don't know what happens in a women's circle. I assumed it would be similar to men, where they share things in a respectful way. Like, we had a talking stone in Wild Rights. And the good thing about that was, that's right, you couldn't speak unless you had the stone. Yeah. So that meant if I knew I wasn't going to be attacked or questioned or anything, I could just speak. Yeah. And when I was finished, I would pass it on. So that's I'm assuming...
the same. Yeah, exactly the same. But I have to say, I think women's circles, or men's circles actually, obviously, are... I think they're really, really powerful. Like, I think Definitely. I think the thing for me that's the most powerful element of them is the fact that you're being heard without any judgment, and you're just being witnessed. So like the opportunity to be yourself is really it's a gift, isn't it? To be able to really be yourself. And the other thing I really like about them, I don't know if this is your experience too, is that I think you can speak your own experience, whatever it might be on that day, and then other people will speak their experience, and you hear a part of yourself in everybody. So you have this real sense of just like the collective nature of what it means to be human. It's like, I'm the same as that person, I'm the same as that person, I'm the same as that person, and actually we're all we're all okay. We're all struggling, but we're all okay. And so for me, that is, I do think group work and circle work, it can just be really powerful, and it is important, and maybe isn't accessible enough. I mean, there are people out there, aren't there, offering that as part of their work.
Yeah, I had to go long and hard to find this, though. I mean, do you get the same resistance with women to a women's circle as you do a men with men's circle? So, for example, I would never call it a men's circle, because I know if I was the guy, I'd be like, I'm not going to a men's circle.
Yeah, interesting, yeah.
But it's like when we have our meetings here, it's pretty much what it is. We sit around a circular table and we allow each other to speak freely. But I don't label it men's circle. And again, going back to that kind of voice in your head, when I see there's a guy called Craig White, he's fantastic, but he does something called Men Without Masks.
Right.
And he puts pictures on of like men hugging each other and putting their, and it makes me just kind of go, oh, I don't want to do any of that shit. But it's stuff I've done, the stuff that benefits me.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of like, there's that split again. Like, it's almost just, I don't know whether you get this with the girls, but the men seem to have a much greater resistance to do that. And sometimes they're better put in an environment where they don't know it's going to happen and just let it happen naturally and organically rather than I'm going to go and join that men's circle where men talk to each other and share their problems. That's quite a big deal. It's getting past that first hurdle. And the way I've always done it is through activity and challenge. Well, let's go and climb a mountain first, and then when we've struggled together and we've kind of like, you know, the walls are down, then we'll talk. That seems to work well.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this to you when we first met, didn't I?
Yeah.
Kind of, it's kind of, you get that bit of manly stuff out.
Yeah, and then you can sit down together.
And you suffer together. They're not strangers anymore. You've been through something. Which is what role rights is all about. If you think about it, you meet, you go off and suffer on your own by isolation, and then you come back and you share your stories. Yeah. And that's what it was all about. You share your story. Do you know what I mean? So there is a skill and an art to that of like not just putting people in the circle, but making them almost qualified to get there.
Yeah, that is really interesting, because I think it is probably, I think you're right that it's easy to sort of assume that that's a lot easier for women, and I'm not sure that it is.
Well, that's it. I don't know. That was my question.
I think maybe it is marginally easier for women. I think women are very good on one-to-one. You know, they are good at. Women will immediately often start talking about, you know, something that's difficult for them.
The women I know wouldn't join women's circles.
Well, that's what I mean. That's what I mean. But they might. But the women you know might quite easily sit down and have a conversation about something that's quite personal. But they wouldn't necessarily be drawn or think that they want to go and sit in a circle. So I think there's something about the collectiveness of it that makes it feel quite challenging for most people, you know, men and women probably.
Maybe it's the women I've been with, but they're very much like, they get on with it too. They're tough. Like women can be really fucking tough, you know. Like mentally, like probably I've trained men and women. Like let me put this in a gym context. Men bitch more than women do.
Okay, interesting. I'll take your word for it.
They do. They complain more, they grunt more, they moan more, they make a big deal out of things. Women are, I in my experience, they're a little bit more mentally headstrong. They just don't vocalise it as much. They just do it. They just get on with it. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see that. Yeah. I just think it's different parts of us, isn't it? That come up at different times that we, you know. Yeah,
they're more emotional.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, well, that doesn't really make sense. But it like you say, it's parts.
Yeah. I do find that way of thinking about people really helpful. Just the idea that, you know, a part of you steps forward in any given moment and then kind of steps back again. And that you can be 1 minute really, you know, focused and driven and kind of a bit like dissociated or whatever from your challenges, and then the next minute you can be really talking kind of openly.
Well, I hope you pursue that.
Yeah, well, that's the plan. I mean, you know,
you should do it. Like I say,
too.
No, you'd be great at it. You're a great listener too. So I think, like I say, the women that work with you would be really fortunate. I don't think you can ever undervalue or underestimate the power of that. Like you said, it is powerful.
And I think it's something for young women that, you know, for me, it's something I found quite late on in life, you know, maybe like 10 years ago or something. And I wish that I'd found it earlier. I think it would have
well, then you definitely have to do it.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? You do often end up doing things that you
of course
would like to
what did I need as a young
yourselves.
man?
Yeah, exactly.
What did I need as a young woman?
Yeah, exactly.
The things that weren't there. And even what do I need now? It's like you can create businesses with that in that gap.
Yeah.
You know, so if you're looking for a men's circle or a women's circle and you can't find one, two things. One, no one wants it.
Yeah.
Or number two, just no
It's
one's
not
created
there.
it yet.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
create it.
Yeah.
It's pretty much what an entrepreneur would do, right?
Yeah.
It's thinking with that mindset. But
yeah.
So there's a bit of a traditional question. I'm looking forward to hearing your answer on this one. I don't know if you've heard it on any of the podcasts. What do you need to work on like now, in whether this is personal, professional, whatever, in order to become a better person? So I would normally say a better man, obviously, but a better woman. Yeah. What is it you feel like you need to work on?
I mean, how long have you got, Alex? So I think. I mean, there are loads of things that I could work on. Like, I'm always trying to work on being a more present, more whatever parent.
Yeah.
But I suppose the thing that's resonated with me recently with the reading that I've been doing about the patriarchy is actually is kind of speaking out. Like, I think that's something that, I mean, I'm doing this podcast, that's quite a thing.
I didn't have to nag you at all, did I?
No, not at all.
Well, I just know you've got such good value to offer. Like, it's felt like, yeah, you should be behind this mic.
Well, but I suppose what I mean is there's something about, I think for me, there's definitely something about stepping into something, speaking out a bit more and being a bit brave, like it's I love my job as it is. It's, and I'd be very happy to kind of keep doing it. But I know that there are things that I'm drawn to. So what's that courage, speaking out? I don't know. There's I guess those pieces.
What do you think it is? Is it courage? Is it knowing what you truly believe in, and when you do, you will shout it from the rooftop?
I think I do know that.
You do.
Yeah,
so do you think
I think
it's
it probably
the
is courage.
one?
Yeah, I think it probably is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it's an interesting one for me. Why people wouldn't, when you know within yourself you're not showing up 100%.
Yeah.
Because I've got in this place before, and books like this kind of confuse me even more sometimes. I'm like, am I doing a good thing for men, really? Or am I just adding to the problem?
Yeah.
So then you start to kind of like go within yourself because you're like, well, I don't know the answers, so I'm not going to go out there and vocalize and preach. Yeah. So it's like then that's sometimes why I would become a little bit quieter and dumb down the volume and think I haven't got anything to say. Because what do I know?
I know it is very, very easy to get into that place. I think very easy. Yeah. I mean, I think for women, it's actually quite a natural place. Like for me, it's quite a natural place to feel like I don't really have anything to say. Why would I, and I do think that's probably quite an experience that women might have. So I think that's why some of the stuff that, reading about the patriarchy for me has been really quite empowering. Not because, not because I think it means that men are bad, but because it highlights what I, as a woman, would want to focus on a bit more. So that's, and where I might have felt less empowered because of the societal expectations of me rather than, my family life or whatever that I would normally kind of connect to why I do or don't do things. Okay. So I think probably is courage.
So how do we go about installing more courage?
I'm not sure entirely. I think
do we train it? Do we jump into things that demand a little bit of it and then a little bit more
and then a little bit more?
I think so. How I would
I think so, and that's what somatic experience would say, sort of titrating. Okay. If something is a challenge to you, you don't flood yourself. You don't, if you can't swim, you don't jump in at the deep end, although, people do that, but that's...
They do.
Yeah.
I'm lucky to have the gym, like 20 years of gym analogies and blueprints behind me. So I wouldn't get you to squat 100 kilos if you couldn't squat 60.
Yeah.
But I'd get you to work towards 62.5 kilos.
Yeah,
so it's always placing that little bit more demand. That's how you get stronger in the gym, right?
Yeah,
you kind of place a little bit more stress on yourself over time. And I think courage, any trait really is that.
Yeah.
It's like, well, maybe the podcast is the start, right? It's like new. It's maybe, I don't know whether it was uncomfortable or what, but it was something new, right?
Absolutely.
And then you do another one, and then another one, and then you go and do some out. Then you set up your circle. Then you do a talk in front of... Do you know what I mean? You just keep going, right? Until the courage is stronger than what it was. What I do know about courage is you need to put yourself in front of things that scare you to build courage.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's quite a hard thing for a lot of people to get their head around. They want to be courageous, but they're not willing to feel scared.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. You're right. So yeah, I need to, that's my self-development piece for the next year.
And I think all of ours. Like I said, this isn't, this isn't Kaaran suffers with courage. It's like we all do.
Yeah.
So it's like, this is the great thing you said about the circle. You pick up off people and you go, well, where do I need to work on that? And there's always answers, isn't there?
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah, absolutely. And people will give you little clues from their experience that you can be like, oh, yeah.
Yeah. You enjoy that?
Yeah. It's just a chat, isn't it? Like you said.
Just a chat. You're excellent. And like I say, when you did the training for the guys, it was excellent. They were all buzzing after that because trauma is something, especially between men, we don't really speak about. So to be educated on that was pretty cool.
Yeah, well,
know your stuff,
I enjoyed that too.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate you coming in, and I might buy Gabor Mate's book, I think.
Yeah, it's
out
really
of those
good.
Ones. Yeah, I like him. Check him out on Joe Rogan. Great podcast.
Yes, yeah. I will. Thank you.
Cool.